Admiral Yamamoto, the man who warned Japan. In the long, turbulent history of war, few figures embody both brilliance and tragedy as completely as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. He was a man who loved his country deeply, and yet foresaw with chilling accuracy how it would one day be brought to ruin. This is the story of the man who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the same man who warned that Japan could never win the war it was about to begin. Isoroku Yamamoto was born in 1884 in the small city of Nagaoka in Niigata Prefecture on Japan's western coast. His family was of the samurai class, but by the late 19th century, the samurai's era was over. Japan was modernizing fast. Young Isoroku grew up in a country in transition, torn between the pride of its warrior past and the excitement of new Western technologies and ideas. From an early age, he was drawn to the sea. He entered the Imperial Japanese Naval Academy in 1901, graduating near the top of his class. He was small in stature, quiet, and disciplined, but his instructors quickly recognized a sharp mind and an unusual sense of independence. As a young officer, Yamamoto fought in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, the conflict that first announced Japan's arrival as a modern military power. At the Battle of Tsushima, he saw firsthand the destruction that modern naval warfare could unleash. His ship was hit. He was injured, losing 2 fingers on his left hand. It was said that from then on, he carried his maimed hand as a reminder of war's cost and of the thin line between victory and annihilation. After the war, Japan's navy was expanding. To keep pace with Western powers, Japan sent its best officers abroad to study. In 1919, Yamamoto was chosen to attend Harvard University in the United States. For many Japanese officers of that era, America was a mystery, a vast industrial land of wealth, machines, and contradictions. But Yamamoto approached it with curiosity rather than suspicion. At Harvard, he studied English and economics. He read about the oil industry, steel production, and the American way of life. He traveled widely to Boston, New York, Washington, and Chicago. He visited factories, shipyards, and stock exchanges. What he saw impressed him deeply: the energy of American industry, the ingenuity of its engineers, and the almost limitless capacity for production. He played poker with his classmates, drank whiskey with them, and came to understand how Americans thought: bold, impatient, confident in their destiny. For Yamamoto, these years were transformative. He returned to Japan with a rare perspective: admiration for the United States, mixed with a quiet warning that Japan should never underestimate such a nation. In the 1920s, Yamamoto continued to rise through the naval ranks. He specialized in naval aviation, a new field that many senior admirals dismissed as a novelty. But Yamamoto saw that airplanes would change everything. He pushed for Japan to invest in aircraft carriers and to train pilots, not just gunners. To some of his superiors, this seemed reckless. The battleships still ruled the sea. But Yamamoto's foresight would later prove prophetic. He returned again to the United States in 1925 as a naval attaché in Washington. There, he attended disarmament conferences and negotiated naval treaties. He observed, with concern, how Japan's ambitions in Asia were beginning to alienate the Western powers. Yamamoto saw 2 futures for Japan: one, where it modernized alongside the West as an equal trading nation, and another, where it clashed with those same powers over territory, pride, and ideology. He feared Japan was drifting toward the second path. By the early 1930s, Japan was changing, and not for the better. Nationalism was rising. The military was gaining control over politics. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, setting off international outrage. Officers who opposed expansionism were often silenced, sometimes literally. Yamamoto, though a loyal officer, found himself increasingly at odds with the militarists. He believed Japan's destiny was tied to its economic survival, not its conquest of foreign lands. He warned that if Japan went to war with the United States, it would face an opponent with far greater industrial strength, one that could outproduce Japan 10-1 in ships, planes, and weapons. At one naval conference, he said plainly, "Anyone who has seen the automobile factories and the oil fields of America knows that Japan cannot fight a long war against such a power." His warnings made him unpopular with hardliners, but his brilliance as a strategist kept him indispensable. In 1939, Yamamoto was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, Japan's most powerful naval post. By then, war in Europe had already begun. Hitler's Germany was on the rise, and Japan had aligned itself with the Axis powers. Yamamoto privately doubted the wisdom of this alliance. He admired Germany's military skill, but he distrusted its ideology and its arrogance. He understood that Japan's true rival was not Britain or Germany, but the United States. When Japan began preparing for possible war with America, Yamamoto faced a terrible dilemma. He was ordered to plan an opening strike that would cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet, to give Japan a chance to win quickly before America could mobilize. Yamamoto obeyed, but reluctantly. To his colleagues, he said words that would later become famous. "In the first 6 months of war, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success." It was not false humility. It was prophecy. Still, Yamamoto was a naval officer. His duty was to follow orders. And if Japan was to strike, he believed it should do so with overwhelming force, decisively, and with precision. That logic led him to conceive one of the most daring operations in naval history, the attack on Pearl Harbor. He studied America's fleet movements, the geography of Hawaii, and the habits of the U.S. Navy. He knew that a surprise aerial attack could cripple the Pacific Fleet, at least temporarily. He also knew that such an attack would awaken the United States to total war. To some of his subordinates, the plan seemed audacious, even reckless. But Yamamoto insisted that the only hope for Japan lay in shocking America into negotiation before its industrial might could be brought to bear. He told one officer, "To make war on the United States is to gamble everything: the fate of our empire, our families, our future." He knew it was a gamble Japan could not afford to lose. As 1941 progressed, Japan's relations with the United States deteriorated rapidly. The U.S. imposed oil embargoes and trade restrictions, hoping to pressure Japan to withdraw from China. Instead, Japan's leaders decided that only war could secure their access to resources. Yamamoto, as the Navy's top commander, was bound by loyalty to carry out their decision. But those close to him noticed his unease. He often spoke of his time in America, of the people he had met, the vastness of the country, and the kindness of ordinary Americans. One of his aides recalled him saying quietly, "If I must fight, I will fight. But I have seen America, and I know we cannot win." In private letters, he wrote of his weariness, of how he wished diplomacy could succeed, though he no longer believed it would. By November 1941, the plan for Pearl Harbor was complete. 6 aircraft carriers, 353 planes, and a carefully coordinated attack force would strike Hawaii at dawn on December 7th. Yamamoto himself would remain in Japan, commanding from afar, his face calm, his heart heavy. On the morning of December 7th, 1941, the skies over Oahu filled with Japanese aircraft. In less than 2 hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet was devastated. 8 battleships damaged or sunk, hundreds of planes destroyed, thousands of lives lost. To the world, it was a shocking display of Japanese military skill. To Yamamoto, it was something else, a fulfillment of his grim prediction. When he received confirmation that the attack had succeeded, he did not rejoice. According to one witness, he sat in silence, then said softly, "We have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. Whether he actually said those exact words remains debated, but the sentiment was real. Yamamoto knew that the clock was now ticking. The 6 months of running wild had begun. And indeed, in the months that followed, Japan won victory after victory. The Philippines fell. Singapore was captured. The British and American fleets reeled. For a moment, it seemed Yamamoto's strategy had worked. Japan ruled the Western Pacific. But beneath the surface, the balance was already shifting. American industry was mobilizing. New ships, planes, and carriers were being built in staggering numbers. Within months, the United States Navy would be larger, stronger, and more determined than ever. Yamamoto watched this with unease. He had fulfilled his duty, but the very success of his plan ensured that Japan would now face the wrath of a nation whose capacity for war he knew too well. The 6 months were almost up. As spring of 1942 approached, Yamamoto prepared for the next phase of the war, one that would test not only Japan's navy, but his own judgment as a commander. The year is 1942. Across the Pacific, the red sun of Japan seems to shine at its brightest. The empire has expanded farther than any of its leaders had dreamed. From the shores of Burma to the jungles of the Philippines, from the Aleutian Islands to the Solomon Chain. And at the center of it all stands one man, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet. To the Japanese public, he is a national hero, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor, the man who humbled the mighty United States Navy. But to those who know him, the reality is very different. Behind his calm expression lies a mind tormented by foreknowledge. He knows what few others dare to admit. Japan's victories are fleeting. The tide will turn, and when it does, it will be relentless. After Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto tried to use Japan's momentum to force a decisive battle. He believed that only by destroying the remaining American carriers could Japan secure a lasting peace on favorable terms. That belief would lead to one of the most pivotal battles in history, Midway. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was Yamamoto's bold attempt to draw the U.S. fleet into a trap. His plan was intricate, perhaps too intricate. He intended to lure the American carriers into defending Midway Island, while his main fleet waited in ambush. But Yamamoto did not know that American cryptographers had already broken Japan's naval codes. The U.S. Navy knew his plan almost as soon as he made it. When the two forces met northwest of Midway Atoll, the trap was reversed. 4 of Japan's frontline aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were destroyed in a matter of hours. The victory Japan had hoped would end the war instead became the turning point that began its downfall. For Yamamoto, the loss was devastating. He had commanded from hundreds of miles away aboard his flagship, the Yamato, the most powerful battleship ever built. As reports came in, first confusion, then disaster, he realized the magnitude of the defeat. Japan had lost not only 4 carriers but hundreds of its best pilots, men who could not easily be replaced. In a war of attrition, such losses were fatal. Yamamoto bore the responsibility in silence. He did not blame his subordinates. He did not plead for sympathy. He simply accepted that the war he had tried to avoid was now unwinnable. Still, he did not give up. For the next year, Yamamoto led Japan's naval operations with discipline and skill. He tried to stabilize Japan's defenses to buy time. Perhaps he hoped enough for diplomacy to reemerge. But the war only grew bloodier. At Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, Japan and the United States fought a brutal, grinding campaign that lasted 6 months. Once again, Yamamoto watched as Japan's strength bled away. His fleet still fought bravely, but the Americans fought with a different kind of power, one that came from factories, shipyards, and a seemingly endless reserve of men and machines. Yamamoto had warned his government about this very thing years before. Now, he was witnessing the proof of his own prophecy. By early 1943, the war was turning decisively against Japan. The Americans had retaken Guadalcanal, their carrier fleets were stronger than ever, and new bombers now reached deep into Japanese-held territory. Yamamoto remained active, touring forward bases to raise morale. He was respected by his men, admired for his simplicity, his fairness, and his refusal to live in luxury while others suffered. He wrote letters to his family whenever he could, though they were brief and understated. He missed his home in Nagaoka. He missed the quiet rituals of life, tea, poetry, the company of old friends. But he also knew he would likely never see home again. On April 13, 1943, Yamamoto's staff prepared a routine inspection tour of Japanese bases in the Solomon Islands. The admiral's itinerary was detailed down to the minute: takeoff times, landing points, lunch stops. He was a man of precision, but this time that precision would cost him his life. American intelligence, having broken Japan's naval codes once again, intercepted Yamamoto's schedule. His exact flight path and time of arrival were now known to U.S. commanders in the Pacific. The mission to intercept him was given the codename Operation Vengeance. At dawn on April 18, 1943, Yamamoto boarded his Mitsubishi G4M bomber, known to Allied pilots as a Betty. He was accompanied by several staff officers and escorted by 6 fighters. He believed in discipline to the end. He insisted on punctuality. As he prepared to depart, he reportedly said, "The war is not going well, but I will continue to do my duty until the end." Shortly after 7 a.m., his plane lifted off from Rabaul, bound for Bougainville. Unknown to him, a squadron of US P-38 Lightning fighters was already in the air, flying a 400-mile route at treetop level to intercept him. They reached the rendezvous point exactly on time. At 9:34 a.m., the American pilots spotted Yamamoto's formation. Within minutes, the sky erupted. Yamamoto's plane was hit, burst into flames, and crashed into the jungle below. He was killed instantly, still strapped into his seat. When Japanese search parties found the wreckage the next day, they found Yamamoto's body leaning forward, his sword still by his side. His watch had stopped at 9:35. He was 59 years old. His death was a severe blow to Japanese morale. Even those who had disagreed with him respected his intellect and his integrity. To many, it felt as though the soul of the Navy had died with him. The government announced his death weeks later, describing him as a martyr to duty. Across Japan, memorial services were held. His ashes were eventually returned to his hometown of Nagaoka, where they remain today. For the Americans, Operation Vengeance was hailed as a major success, a symbolic strike at the architect of Pearl Harbor. But even among his enemies, Yamamoto commanded respect. Many U.S. officers, including those who fought against him, recognized his strategic brilliance and his fundamental humanity. They understood that Yamamoto had not been a warmonger, but a realist, a man who had served his country faithfully, even when he disagreed with its path. In the years after the war, Yamamoto's image became the subject of debate, both in Japan and abroad. To some, he was the genius behind Pearl Harbor, responsible for plunging Japan into a war it could not win. To others, he was a tragic figure, a man who saw the future too clearly and was powerless to change it. In truth, he was both. He was loyal, but skeptical, disciplined, yet human, a warrior who knew that war itself was folly. What makes Yamamoto's story so haunting is not only what he did, but what he understood. He had walked the streets of New York and Boston. He had seen the factories of Detroit, the oil fields of Texas, the shipyards along the Great Lakes. He knew that America's strength did not lie only in its weapons, but in its ability to adapt, to create, to produce without end. He respected that strength and he feared it. He once wrote, long before Pearl Harbor, "If I am ordered to fight, I will fight, but it will not be with joy. I have seen the steel and oil of America. I know what awaits us." Those were not the words of a coward, but of a man who understood the true cost of war. After Yamamoto's death, the Pacific War continued for more than 2 years. Japan's navy, once the pride of the empire, was gradually destroyed. By 1945, the same industrial might that Yamamoto had warned about crushed Japan completely through blockade, bombardment, and, finally, atomic fire. Yamamoto's warnings had come true in every sense. When Japan surrendered, a new world began to take shape. And in that world, the lessons of men like Yamamoto were remembered, at least for a while. He became a symbol not only of Japan's wartime past, but of the dangers of pride, of underestimating one's enemy, and of mistaking courage for wisdom. Today, in his hometown of Nagaoka, there is a small museum dedicated to him. Inside are his personal effects, his uniform, his letters, his books, and the wristwatch recovered from the jungle. Visitors often describe the place as quiet, almost reverent. On one wall hangs a simple inscription, quoting Yamamoto himself, "A true soldier does not fight because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him." It is a sentiment that transcends nations and wars. For all his flaws and contradictions, Yamamoto embodied that truth. He fought for the country he loved, and in doing so, fulfilled the destiny he had long tried to prevent. In the end, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto remains one of history's great paradoxes. The man who orchestrated Pearl Harbor was also the man who knew it would lead to Japan's destruction. The man who served his emperor faithfully was also the one who understood that blind loyalty can destroy a nation. He was neither villain nor hero, only human. And perhaps that is what makes his story endure. A man of intellect and honor, who warned of disaster, who followed his duty, and who perished in the war he never wanted. Admiral Yamamoto, the man who warned Japan.